Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Nickens, and this is Beyond the Bandeja Paisa, exploring the African roots of Colombia's diverse cuisine. Colombia's history has been shaped by many different cultures, and this is directly reflected within the food. From the indigenous people, like the Quimbaya or the Kalimantan, to the Spanish conquistadors, African slaves, and immigrants from Europe and the Middle East, Colombia's food is a melting pot of various flavors and traditions. One of the most significant influences on Colombian cuisine would be the African culinary tradition. African slaves were brought to Colombia during the colonial period, specifically the transatlantic slave trade, and they played an essential role in shaping the country's cuisine. Today, African heritage can be found in many popular Colombian dishes. I'm going to start off with my personal favorite, the dish that I've been raised to love, but also one of Colombia's most famous dish, the bandeja paisa. With the title Workman's Plate due to its large, fulfilling portions, this hearty platter typically includes rice, beans, ground beef, chorizo, which is in Spanish just sausages, a fried egg, chicharron, which is fried pork belly, avocado, and plantains. In other countries, they call plantains tostones, but in Colombia, we call them patacon. The dish came from the area of Antigua, but it is now popular all over the country. Interestingly enough, many of the components of the bandeja paisa have African roots. For instance, rice and beans were staple foods in West Africa, and African slaves brought plantains over to Colombia. Another popular Colombian dish with African roots would be the sancocho. Sancocho is a soup that typically includes chicken or beef, but if you live in a coastal region such as Santa Marta or Cartagena, you can get it with fish, where it's more popular, but I personally prefer it with chicken, and in Colombia, they typically don't use regular chickens. What they normally will use is more of like a hen. So it's typically a little more firm, not as tender as regular chicken. But the soup comes with yuca, corn, cilantro, and other vegetables. In different countries, they have a very similar soup called sopa de res, which is almost identical, but they will argue over whose is the main dish. But it's popular all throughout Latin America, but the roots are seen clearly from West Africa. Many African slaves brought to the Americas spoke the Bantu language, which is where the word sancocho is believed to have originated from. In addition to these popular dishes, there are many other Colombian foods with African influence. For example, one of my favorite appetizers or snack, empanadas. They are very similar to West African meat pies or Jamaican beef patties, and are made by putting different meats, rice, potatoes, some places do egg, I personally don't like it, into a cornmeal pocket, fried, and served with ají. Ají is very similar to a pico de gallo, very spicy, and it's typically the only spicy component of Colombian cuisine. But think of pico de gallo with less tomato. Cornmeal, a ground meal made from dried corn, was brought to the Americas by African slaves. This is the basis for arepas, which is you can't get any meal at all from Colombia without including an arepa. Think of a Johnny cake. The best way I can describe it is a pancake made from cornmeal, but it's very common in Colombia, and you can see different staples like Mexico or El Salvador, where instead of arepas, they use tortillas, which is still used for masa, just made a little different. But Colombia also has tamales, a traditional food made from that same masa and filled with meat or vegetables. They're very similar to West African conchis that are also made from the same ground corn mixture. But it's also worth noting that many Colombian dishes have direct counterparts in African cuisine. For example, fufu, which is a staple food in West and Central Africa, is similar to the Colombian dish known as mote de queso, which is made from mashed yuca and cheese. Arroz con coco, a popular Colombian dessert made from coconut and rice, is very similar to African rice pudding. I've had both. I prefer the African rice pudding. And in terms of the tamales are made many different ways depending on what country you're from. But I think it's incredible to see the similarities from here in Africa, how many generations have passed, different cultures have transpired, but the ingredients are still almost the same. But in conclusion, African heritage plays an essential role in Colombian cuisine, from staple foods like rice and beans and plantains to popular dishes like the bandeja paisa and sancocho. African culinary traditions are an integral part of Colombia's food culture. As we continue to learn about the long and varied history of Colombian food, it's important to recognize the contributions of African culture and celebrate the flavors and traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation. Thank you so much.